Welcome. Tonight, we journey back in time. Back to a land where the desert winds whispered against stone walls, and where the Nile's slow current was the lifeblood of an ancient civilization. This is Egypt. Not in the brilliance of midday, with golden sunlight glinting against temple pillars and bustling marketplaces, but in the quiet hours when the sun had finally sunk below the horizon, when the heat lingered in the stones, when lamps were lit, when silence stretched across the sands, and when life slowed into its most intimate rhythms. The ancient Egyptians lived by the sun, but the night was no less important. It carried with it the discomforts of insects and heat, the solemnity of sacred ceremonies, the dangers of thieves, and the contrasting luxuries of palatial feasts. In this gentle exploration, we will move slowly through 4 different aspects of Egyptian nights. First, the ordinary world of trying to sleep in Thebes, with its buzzing mosquitoes, clay houses, and restless heat. Then, the quiet yet powerful nighttime rituals of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as king. After that, the hidden shadow of tomb robbery in the Valley of the Kings, a nighttime drama told through fragile papyri. And finally, we will step into the flickering glow of torchlight, to glimpse the royal court at its most opulent, with feasts that stretched into the night. So, make yourself comfortable, and imagine yourself drifting back through centuries to the stillness of an Egyptian night. Picture yourself in Thebes around 1200 BCE. The city rests on the east bank of the Nile, its temples immense, its houses far more modest. The sun has set, but the air is still heavy with the warmth of the day. The mud brick walls of the house around you hold that heat, breathing it back into the night air. You lie on a woven mat, or perhaps a low wooden bedframe, your head supported by a carved headdress of wood or alabaster. Pillows, soft and stuffed with down, were rare, reserved mostly for the wealthy. Instead, the curved headrest cradles your skull, keeping you cool, and ensuring that insects are less likely to crawl across your face. Sleep does not come easily. The air is thick and unmoving. From somewhere outside, you hear the faint buzzing of mosquitoes. Egyptians knew these little creatures all too well. They were not merely an annoyance, but a constant fact of nightly life by the river. To guard against them, families sometimes hung nets woven of linen, not so different from the mosquito nets still used today. Others burned incense, coils of frankincense or myrrh, its smoke gently rising in the air, masking the human scent that drew the insects. Inside the home, lamps of clay glow faintly. A wick, usually a strip of linen, floats in oil pressed from castor beans or sesame. Its flame is soft and golden, illuminating the mud-plastered walls. The smell of the oil is faint, earthy, and slightly acrid, but comforting in its familiarity. Outside, the city is quieter than it had been in the daytime. The marketplace stalls are shuttered, the animals tethered. The clamor of voices faded into murmurs. Yet the night is never entirely silent. From beyond the house walls, you might hear the bray of a donkey, the soft shuffle of feet on the packed earth, or the low cry of a child disturbed in sleep. Life in the home follows a rhythm. The family eats their final meal before darkness, a simple fare of bread, lentils, perhaps onions, or dates. Meat is rare, kept for festivals or wealthier households. Water jars are refilled before night, for no one wishes to make the long walk to the river in darkness. The Nile's edge can be treacherous, its banks alive with insects, and sometimes the lurking shadow of crocodiles. Now, in the stillness, you feel the day's fatigue settle into your body. The people of Thebes rose early, often before sunrise, so nights were not meant for long wakefulness. Yet, the heat often kept sleep at bay. It was common for families to move their mats outside onto flat rooftops. There, the night air was marginally cooler. One might gaze upward to the steady brilliance of the stars, so much sharper in the desert sky than in most modern cities. Imagine lying there on a rooftop overlooking Thebes, with the constellations of Orion and Sirius glimmering overhead. For Egyptians, these stars were not distant or abstract. They were part of the sacred order of the universe. Sirius, in particular, the star they called Sopdat, was tied to the flooding of the Nile, to fertility, and to the goddess Isis herself. As you drift into rest, you are not only a person seeking sleep, you are also part of a larger cosmic rhythm, watched over by the gods, connected to the heavens that guided your ancestors and shaped your future. The stillness is deep but fragile. Dogs bark in the distance. A warm breeze stirs dust from the street. Yet, beneath it all, the steady pulse of life continues. The Nile flowing unseen in the darkness. The heartbeat of Egypt. And as the night deepens in Thebes, we too move deeper into the story of Egyptian nights. From the homes of ordinary people, let us now turn to the palaces and temples, and to a ruler who reshaped Egypt's destiny under the cover of night. Now we leave the simple rooftops of Thebes, where families stretched out beneath the stars, and we step into another realm entirely, the world of palaces and temples. The realm of Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. She reigned in the 15th century BCE, in a time when Egypt was powerful, wealthy, and expansive. But her rule was unusual, for Hatshepsut was a woman who took on the full role and regalia of a king. By day, her court was filled with scribes, advisors, and traders. But by night, there was a different rhythm. When the city of Thebes rested, the temples still breathed with activity. Priests moved quietly through pillared halls, lamps flickering against painted walls. That told the stories of gods and kings. Imagine walking through the temple of Karnak in darkness. The air is cooler here, but filled with a faint scent of burning resin and incense. The stone columns rise like a forest around you, their carved surfaces barely visible by lamplight. Your footsteps echo softly, and somewhere, deeper inside, the low chant of priests rolls in steady cadence. For Hatshepsut, the night was not only for sleep. It was also for a communion with the divine. The Egyptians believed that the gods themselves kept watch in darkness, and that their presence was strongest in the still hours before dawn. Special ceremonies were carried out then, offerings, libations, and prayers whispered into shadowed halls. Hatshepsut, often participated in these rites. In art and inscription, she is shown making offerings to Amun, the great god of Thebes. Her figure carved with the beard and crown of a male pharaoh. Yet her features still unmistakably feminine. At night, she might be carried in procession, the air around her alive with torchlight, the smell of myrrh clinging to her garments. The ceremonies themselves were slow, deliberate, and deeply symbolic. Offerings of bread, beer, and fragrant oils were placed before the gods' statues. Priests sang hymns in low tones, their words rising and falling like waves. These statues, hidden during the day within the inner sanctuaries, were sometimes brought out by lamplight, their polished faces gleaming faintly. One of the most sacred acts was the opening of the mouth ritual, performed so that the statue of a god might breathe, might see, might receive the offerings of the living. This was not done casually, but with quiet reverence, often at night, when the outside world was still. Hatshepsut herself would have stood near, her presence a bridge between human and divine. Pharaohs were more than rulers. They were intermediaries, their lives and duties woven into cosmic balance. Picture her in that space, a woman who took on the mantle of kingship, surrounded by priests chanting into the darkness. Her crown glitters in the lamplight. The scent of lotus oil lingers in the air. Outside, the rest of Thebes sleeps, but here, in the temple's heart, time itself seems suspended. The role of night in ritual was practical as well as symbolic. The cooler hours allowed for long ceremonies without the stifling burden of midday heat. The quiet made the sacred words easier to hear. And above it all, the stars moved steadily across the sky, the same stars that guided farmers on their rooftops, but now interpreted by priests as divine portents. For Hatshepsut, nights like these were not only acts of devotion, they were also acts of politics. To rule as a woman required constant reaffirmation of legitimacy. Every ritual performed in her presence, every offering made by her hands, reminded Egypt that the gods accepted her authority. Thus, the stillness of Egyptian nights was layered. Ordinary people sought sleep, while rulers sought divine sanction. Both were connected by the same rhythms of darkness, yet their experiences could not have been more different. As dawn slowly approached, priests would extinguish the lamps, seal the doors of the sanctuaries, and let the city stir back to life. But the memory of those shadowed hours remained. A world where power, faith, and silence intertwined. From here, we turn to another side of Egypt's night. Not the sacred, nor the ordinary, but the secret and unlawful. Beyond the walls of the temples, in the valley of the kings, shadows concealed crimes. The restless work of those who slipped into tombs by lamplight, seeking treasure among the dead. The valley of the kings, silent, solemn, and carved deep into the desert rock. Here, Egypt's rulers of the new kingdom were laid to rest, their tombs cut into cliffs, their chambers painted with brilliant scenes of gods and afterlives, their bodies wrapped carefully and surrounded by treasures meant to last for eternity. But the desert night did not always protect them, for where there were treasures, there was temptation. And in the stillness of darkness, robbers came. Imagine the scene. A group of men moving cautiously beneath a moonless sky, their lamps shielded, their sandals muffled against the sand. They know the path. Many were former workers from the very crews who cut these tombs into the stone. They descend into a hidden shaft, the air inside stale and suffocating, the silence so deep that the sound of their breathing seems loud. The Egyptians considered tomb robbery one of the most serious crimes imaginable. To disturb a king's rest was to disturb cosmic order itself. Yet desperation often outweighed fear. Periods of famine or political weakness created opportunities, and the wealth sealed in these tombs was far beyond what most could ever dream of. We know of these crimes not through legends, but through fragile records, papyrus scrolls written in the careful hand of scribes. One of the most famous is the Abbot papyrus, dating to around 1100 BCE. We know, me, no sing, we know, we you, I, we do, we, I, we, you do, you do, we will sit at the stall about you, see thieves that you, the view, go thief, the wolf, you, it records official investigations into a wave of tomb robberies. The scroll describes inspections of tombs, interrogations of suspects, and the discovery that even the resting places of great kings had been broken into. The accounts are strangely matter-of-fact. They tell of men caught with gold rings, with linens stripped from mummies, with jars of ointments once sealed for eternity. Some confessed under questioning, describing how they tunneled into tombs, how they pried open coffins, how they divided the spoils. But the papyri do not dwell on drama. Their tone is bureaucratic, a record of crime and punishment. And yet, beneath those dry words, you can almost sense the tension of those nights. The flicker of a lamp illuminating paintings of gods on the walls. The heavy silence of a chamber where a king once lay. The mingled fear and greed in the robbers' hearts. To guard against such desecration, Egyptians employed night watchmen in the valley. They sat beneath the stars, wrapped in cloaks against the desert chill, listening for the faintest sound of digging or stone breaking. Their duty was lonely and fraught with danger. Few could truly stand against a determined band of thieves. And still, despite all efforts, almost every tomb in the valley was eventually disturbed. The treasures so carefully placed within were carried off, melted down, sold, or hidden away. Even the mummies of kings were not always spared. Some were stripped of their adornments, others hastily reburied by priests who sought to preserve what little remained. The silence of the valley, then, was deceptive. By day, it was a place of solemn construction, chisels ringing against stone as workers carved passageways into the cliffs. By night, it became a theater of shadow and secrecy, where the boundary between reverence and crime was tested again and again. And yet, these stories remind us of something more than theft. They reveal the fragility of human effort against time. Even the greatest kings, entombed with splendor meant to last for millennia, could not escape the persistence of human need. As you picture the valley under starlight, imagine the vast silence. The cliffs standing like sentinels, the ground below concealing chambers filled with art and memory. In that silence, you may hear both the prayers of priests and the furtive footsteps of thieves. Now, let us leave the shadows of the valley and turn to yet another side. For while commoners sweated under mosquito nets and thieves crept into forbidden tombs, the palaces of the pharaohs glowed with torchlight. Their courtyards echoing with music and laughter. The night was not always still. Sometimes it was a stage for splendor. The palace of the pharaoh at night was a world apart from the silence of the valley, and from the rooftops where ordinary Egyptians lay beneath the stars. Here, the night could be filled with sound, color, and light. Flickering torch flames danced against carved columns. Bronze braziers cast warm glows across polished floors, and the air was alive with music, laughter, and the scent of roasted meats and perfumed oils. Imagine entering such a hall. The ceilings are high, supported by columns painted with bright lotus and papyrus motifs. The floors gleam, sometimes inlaid with faience tiles of blue and green. Torches sputter in iron stands, and small oil lamps line the edges of the room, their golden glow steady and soft. Guests arrive, dressed in linen robes, the fabric fine, pleated, and carefully scented. Both men and women wear jewelry of gold and semi-precious stones, carnelian, lapis, turquoise. The air carries the sweet aroma of lotus blossoms. 4 garlands of flowers are draped around the necks of the fortunate few invited to such gatherings. Music begins. The plucked strings of the harp, the low hum of flutes, the rhythmic beat of hand drums. Singers chant softly at first, then build into patterns of song that weave through the chamber. It is not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, hypnotic, a rhythm to accompany the night. Food is brought in by attendants, trays of bread still warm from the ovens, bowls of figs, pomegranates, and dates, platters of roasted goose or beef for those of highest rank. Beer, brewed thick and nourishing, is poured into jars, while the finest wine, imported from the delta or from distant lands, is reserved for the most honored guests. Picture the feast by torchlight. The shadows dance across painted walls. Servants move quietly, refilling cups, offering cooled water scented with mint. The pharaoh, seated at the center, shines in gold and linen, adorned with jewels that catch the firelight. But there is more here than indulgence. Courtly feasts were a performance of power. The abundance displayed reassured allies and courtiers alike that Egypt was strong, prosperous, and eternal. Every loaf of bread, every jug of wine, every musician plucking at the harp, was part of a carefully woven tapestry of authority. And yet, beneath the grandeur, the night could feel strangely intimate. The glow of lamps softened the harshness of daylight, and conversations grew more personal. Whispers carried between noble families, alliances were hinted at, and sometimes secrets were exchanged. The torchlight softened sharp edges, blurring the line between formality and relaxation. There were also lighter moments. Dancers moved gracefully, their anklets jingling softly, their gestures slow and deliberate in the warm light. Children of the elite sometimes played at the edges of the feast. While pets, a cat here, a small dog there, curled beneath tables. Life, even in its most formal displays, was never without these familiar touches. The night stretched on. Torches burned lower, their smoke curling lazily toward the rafters. Some guests drifted into drowsiness, lulled by the music, their heads nodding gently. Others lingered, enjoying the coolness of the later hours, knowing the next day would begin again with the rising sun. In this way, the palace at night reflected Egypt itself, a balance of splendor and humanity, ritual and relaxation, eternity and impermanence. The feast was as fleeting as the flame of an oil lamp, yet it echoed across centuries in the art and memory left behind. And so we leave the palace, its torches dimming, its courtyards falling silent. The guests return to their chambers, the music fades, and Egypt once again slips into stillness. We have drifted through the many shades of Egypt's nights, from the restless rooftops of Thebes, where families sought relief from the heat, to the solemn temple ceremonies of Hatshepsut, to the hidden crimes of tomb robbers in the Valley of the Kings, and finally, to the torchlit splendor of the Pharaoh's palace. Each world was different, yet all shared the same desert night sky. The same stars glimmering above, the same Nile flowing steadily in the darkness. The people of ancient Egypt lived lives shaped by rhythms of sun and shadow. They knew discomfort, devotion, danger, and delight, and in each moment they were bound to the eternal cycle of day and night, a cycle that continues still, long after their voices have faded. Now, as you rest in your own night, you may feel that same rhythm, the quiet heartbeat of the world continuing around you. Unlike the Egyptians, you need not fear mosquitoes or thieves, nor depend on incense to drive away insects, nor climb onto a rooftop to find a cool breeze. Instead, you can simply close your eyes, knowing that the past is behind you, and that this moment is for rest. The desert has gone silent, the torches have gone out, and the Nile drifts on in darkness. May sleep come easily to you, just as it once did, beneath the ancient stillness of Egyptian nights. Settle in, find a position that feels restful, perhaps allowing your shoulders to ease downward and your breathing to fall into a quiet rhythm. Tonight, we will travel together into the long stretch of history that produced one of the most recognizable structures on Earth, the Great Wall of China. You may picture it from photographs, winding like a ribbon of pale stone across mountains and valleys, a presence that seems timeless. But behind the stones, there are older, quieter stories, the rhythm of hammers, the endless shuffle of weary feet, the faint voices of men and women who gave their strength and often their lives to create it. Our journey will not be one of battles and heroes, though they exist. Instead, we will rest among the ordinary details, the mud that stuck to the workers' sandals, the dust that dried on their lips, the silent weight of stone lifted, and placed again, day after day. We will follow the flow of 4 gentle streams of history. First, the back-breaking work of the wall builders themselves, their days of labor under sun and frost. Second, we will drift into the world of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the ambitious ruler whose restless vision gave shape to the wall's beginnings. Third, we will pause over the mysteries that linger, the forgotten soldiers and laborers whose traces still lie beneath the earth, revealed slowly by archaeology. And last, we will contrast the hardship with the lives of those who commanded from above, the generals who stood on the wall, balancing authority with their own burdens. Each part will blend softly into the next, so that the story becomes not a march, but a slow, steady walk. And when our journey closes, you may find yourself a little closer to rest, as though the voices of the past have gently ebbed into silence. Let us begin with the builders who stood at the very foundation of it all. Imagine yourself standing on a bare hillside in northern China more than 2,000 years ago. The air is dry and carries a fine dust that clings to your clothing. Ahead stretches an unbroken horizon, a place where land and sky seem to meet without end. And into that horizon runs the faint beginning of a wall, half stone, half tamped earth, only a line so far, yet demanded to stretch farther than you can see. You are a worker, summoned not by choice, but by decree. Perhaps you were a farmer once, your hands skilled at coaxing grain from soil. Perhaps you were a conscript, drawn from a village as part of the emperor's great project. Now your task is simple and endless: to build. The rhythm of the day is steady and unyielding. At dawn, the camp stirs. Smoke from small cooking fires drifts upward, thin against the pale morning sky. A simple meal, perhaps millet gruel, barely enough to fill you, gives what strength it can. The taste is bland, the portion small. Still, it warms you against a chill that clings to early hours. Soon after, the overseers call. You and your fellow workers gather, carrying baskets, ropes, and wooden tools. There are no machines here, no iron cranes to lift stone. Only the labor of many hands. The materials vary depending on the land. In some stretches, heavy stones are pried from nearby hillsides. In others, the earth itself is pounded into thick, solid walls. To build with stone, you must carry. Each rock, rough against your palms, presses into your skin until calluses form. With ropes slung over shoulders, teams drag the larger blocks. Their edges scrape the ground, leaving shallow marks behind. Progress is measured not in miles, but in paces, in the slow ascent of each stone to its place. To build with earth, you and others gather soil, mixing it with water until it becomes dense and malleable. This mixture is poured into wooden frames, layer upon layer. Then comes the tamping, a steady pounding with wooden mallets, heavy and unrelenting, until the earth is compacted into hardness. The sound repeats endlessly, thud, 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 like a heartbeat stretched across the land. The labor wears down the body. Shoulders ache, knees tremble, backs bow beneath the weight. The air grows hot by midday, shimmering over the land, and sweat streaks down your face. In winter, the opposite. Wind cuts through layers of cloth, stinging your skin. Yet, still, the work continues. Rest is rare. The overseers, appointed by the state, urge speed. Their voices are sharp, though they too are caught in the chain of command, compelled by those above them. Punishment waits for those who falter, sometimes harsh, sometimes final. But most do not resist. There is little choice. You hear the muttered conversations of those around you, voices lowered to avoid notice. They speak of home villages, of families left behind. Some never return. For many, the wall becomes both workplace and grave. It is said, later, that the wall consumed countless lives, though numbers fade into legend. The truth is simple. Many labored, many died, and the wall continued to rise. At night, when the work ceases, you rest in rough shelters, perhaps a simple tent or a hut of woven reeds. The air cools quickly, and exhaustion wraps itself around you. Fires flicker, and the faint sound of distant animals echoes in the dark. The food is much the same as morning grain, boiled into porridge, sometimes with vegetables, rarely with meat. It fills just enough to carry you into another day. Yet, within the hardship, there are moments of quiet. A bird crossing the sky overhead. The feel of wind sweeping dust away for a moment. The shared glance between workers, silent acknowledgement of endurance. These small fragments create a rhythm that allows the days to blend together, forming not a story of triumph, but of persistence. The wall itself grows slowly. From a distance, it appears like a scar upon the earth, a line carved across hills and valleys. Up close, it is rough, uneven, still taking shape. But as each day passes, the work extends it farther. What began as a simple mound becomes a structure thicker, taller, resistant. A wall not only of stone and earth, but of sweat and fatigue. Imagine the silence when the hammers pause. The vast landscape lies still, broken only by the soft rustle of grass and the sigh of the wind. In that quiet, the enormity of the task presses down. A single life is small against such a wall, yet thousands of lives together leave their mark. The builders rarely think of legacy. Their focus is survival, the next stone, the next day. And yet, unknowingly, they create a monument that will outlast them all. As the wall stretches onward, so too does the story. Beyond the workers stands the figure who ordered it, the emperor whose restless ambition made this vast labor possible. To understand why the wall rose at all, we must step into his world. As you leave behind the camps of weary builders, imagine the scene: shifting dust and stone fading into the halls of a grand palace. The air is cooler here, shaded by tiled roofs and heavy wooden beams. The floor beneath your feet is polished smooth, and courtiers move softly, careful with their steps. This is the world of the man who ordered the wall into being, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He was born as Ying Zheng, heir to the throne of the state of Qin, during a time known as the Warring States period. China then was not yet a single land, but a patchwork of rival kingdoms. For centuries, they had fought, raided, and schemed against each other, each desiring to unify the land under its banner. Qin, though once considered a remote and rugged state on the western frontier, had grown strong, its laws strict, its armies disciplined, its ambitions far-reaching. At the age of 13, Yingzheng inherited the throne. His youth did not soften him. Under his reign, Qin forces swept across the land with relentless momentum. One by one, rival states fell, until, by the year 221 BCE, he had done what no one before him had managed. He united the realms of China under a single rule. In this moment, he declared himself not merely a king, but something greater: Shuangdi, the august emperor, the first emperor of a new China. Qin Shi Huang. The unification was not only a military conquest. He sought to knit the vast land together in other ways. The written script was standardized, so that scholars from east to west would recognize the same characters. Currencies were unified, round coins with square holes replacing the patchwork of local tender. Weights and measures, too, were brought under one system. Even the width of wagon axles was regulated so that ruts in the roads would match across provinces. The new empire was vast, its borders stretching across mountains, rivers, and deserts. To the north and west lay nomadic tribes, raiders on horseback who could sweep down into Chinese lands. To protect his realm, Qin Shi Huang looked to walls. Before him, some states had already built defensive walls of their own, marking boundaries and resisting attack. The emperor's vision was to join these scattered fortifications, strengthen them, and extend them into something greater. A single defensive line that would guard the empire's northern frontier. This was the beginning of what later generations would call the Great Wall. Yet his motives went beyond defense. The wall was also a symbol. It projected power, showing both his subjects and his enemies that the emperor could command labor on a scale no one else dared. It marked the boundary between the ordered world of the empire and the untamed lands beyond. In this sense, the wall was not only stone and earth, it was ideology made physical. Qin Shi Huang was a man consumed by ambition. His gaze was not content with walls and armies alone. He longed for immortality. The records tell us of his constant search for elixirs of life, potions, and substances that might preserve him forever. He sent envoys across the seas in search of islands said to hold magical herbs. He consulted alchemists who offered strange brews, many laced with mercury and minerals. Ironically, in his pursuit of life everlasting, he may have hastened his own death. His desire for permanence was reflected in his building projects. The Great Wall was one. His vast road system was another. But perhaps most famous is his burial complex, guarded by the silent ranks of the terracotta warriors. Thousands of clay soldiers, each with unique features, stand in ordered rows underground, watching over him even in death. Within the court, his rule was absolute. Advisors bowed low, their words measured. The emperor's voice carried the weight of law, and his punishments were severe. Books considered dangerous to his authority were burned. Scholars who resisted his decrees were silenced. He believed, perhaps, that to control memory was to secure unity. Yet for all his power, he was also restless. Historical records describe him traveling across the empire, inspecting the lands he had conquered, seeking out mountains and sacred places. His entourage was immense, a moving court that spread across the countryside like a wave. The people glimpsed him rarely, for he was shielded by layers of officials and guards. To many, he was a distant figure, more myth than man. Imagine, then, the contrast between his world and that of the builders. In the palace, he walked under carved beams, surrounded by silk banners and offerings of fine food. On the frontier, men hauled stone beneath scorching sun, their bodies growing thin. Yet both were bound by his vision. The emperor's will was the thread that connected the suffering of the many to the glory of the few. Qin Shi Huang did not live long enough to see his empire endure. He died in 210 BCE on one of his endless journeys far from the capital. His death was concealed at first, hidden by courtiers, afraid of unrest. His grand empire, though, would crumble quickly. Within a few years, rebellion rose, and the Qin dynasty fell. But the wall remained. It was tended, rebuilt, extended by later dynasties. It changed in form, grew stronger in some stretches, faded in others. Yet, at its root lay the emperor's decree, the decision that labor should be bent toward stone and earth in a line against the horizon. As centuries passed, people would forget the names of the countless workers, but they remembered the first emperor. His figure loomed, large and mired for unifying a fractured land, criticized for harshness, whispered about for his obsession with immortality. And always, the wall was linked to him, as though its stones still carried his shadow. From the emperor's world of ambition, let us turn back to the human traces left behind along the wall itself. For if Qin Shi Huang imagined permanence, time has shown otherwise. Stones erode, records vanish, and lives disappear into the soil. Yet archaeology uncovers hints of those who served, who guarded, who vanished along the wall's edge. The emperor is gone now, his court silenced, his tomb sealed beneath the earth. The wall remains, stretching like a patient shadow across the land. And along this wall, century after century, men were stationed soldiers, conscripts, guards who watched the horizon and endured the quiet weight of service. Archaeology whispers their presence back into being. Imagine yourself walking along a ruined stretch of wall today. The stone is worn smooth in places, cracked in others. Grasses grow between the bricks, and the wind moves freely across the open plain. To the casual eye, it seems deserted. Yet beneath the soil, traces remain: broken pottery, fragments of weapons, charred wood from long-collapsed watchtowers. Each small discovery speaks of lives once lived and then forgotten. The soldiers assigned to the wall lived a life of monotony and endurance. Their days followed a steady rhythm, standing guard in wooden towers, patrolling uneven paths, keeping watch over the vast emptiness to the north. Fires were kindled at night to signal messages, their flames visible for miles along the chain of fortifications. Food was basic and sometimes scarce. Millet was the staple grain, ground into porridge or baked into rough bread. Dried meat might supplement the diet, but supplies often ran thin. Archaeological remains show pits once used for storage grain jars buried in the earth, sealed to keep away insects and damp. Within these jars, traces of millet and beans have been found. Preserved across the centuries like faint shadows of meals once eaten. Living quarters were simple. Some soldiers occupied small barracks built of mud brick, while others slept in dugouts carved into the sides of hills. Excavations have revealed hearths blackened with soot, bones of livestock consumed long ago, and the ash of fires that once warmed weary men. In winter, the cold was severe, the wind cutting through clothing and settling into the body. The soldiers huddled together, wrapping themselves in wool or fur when they could. Death was not uncommon. Illness took many. The wall stretched across harsh terrain where water was scarce and diseases spread quickly in crowded quarters. Bandits and raiders, too, posed constant threats. Skirmishes erupted suddenly, leaving behind fallen men whose names were never written. Some of these soldiers simply disappeared into the land. Over the centuries, many perished along the wall. Their bodies left where they fell, eventually buried by shifting soil and drifting sand. It is said in folklore that the wall was built upon the bones of the dead, that its foundation is not only earth and stone, but also flesh and spirit. While this may be more poetic than literal, archaeology does confirm that human remains have been uncovered near certain stretches of those who never returned home. There is a haunting quiet in this. Imagine the soldier who stood at his post, watching for distant riders. Perhaps days passed with nothing on the horizon but sky and dust. He might have thought of his family in a distant village, fields of grain, the voices of children. Yet duty kept him tethered to the wall. And when he vanished, whether by disease, by battle, or by simple exhaustion, the wall continued on, indifferent. The mysteries deepen with the artifacts uncovered. Bronze arrowheads lie scattered in the soil, sometimes in clusters, suggesting brief moments of conflict. Wooden slips, once inscribed with ink, have survived in the arid climate, their writing faded but legible. These slips contained records, lists of rations, reports of patrols, even complaints about shortages. They show that the soldiers were not faceless shadows, but men with concerns, frustrations, and small, daily struggles. One remarkable discovery came from the desert outposts of the Han Dynasty, centuries after Qin Shi Huang's time. There, wooden documents described the lives of wall guards in meticulous detail, how much grain they received, how many arrows were counted at the start of a shift, even punishments for sleeping at one's post. The wall was not just a line of stone, but a network of lives regulated by rule and routine. Archaeologists also find the traces of small comforts. Dice carved from bone suggest games played in idle hours. Fragments of musical instruments hint at songs carried into the wind. These details soften the picture of endless hardship, reminding us that even in harsh conditions, people sought connection and moments of joy. Yet still, the silence lingers. For every artifact recovered, there are countless others lost. The wind has carried away their words, the soil has hidden their bones, and the wall itself has swallowed their presence. When you walk along it today, the emptiness can feel profound, as though the land itself remembers what the records forgot. The mystery of the wall's lost soldiers lies in this tension. We know they were there. We hold their broken pottery their faded ink, their arrowheads. And yet, we do not know their names, their faces, their final thoughts. They lived in the shadow of an empire, their individuality erased by time. What remains is a collective echo, a reminder that great monuments are built not only by emperors, but also by countless unnamed lives. The wall endures, winding across ridges and plains, but the men who guarded it are dust. In their absence, we are left with fragments, with questions that may never be answered. Perhaps it is fitting. The wall was meant as a barrier, a line of separation. And in a way, it has separated past from present, leaving us only glimpses of what once was. From the forgotten soldiers who stood watch in the cold, we turn now to those who lived very differently in the wall's shadow. For alongside the common builders and guards, there were men of rank, generals, who commanded from above. Their lives marked not by hunger and monotony, but by privilege, responsibility, and the constant balance of authority. Shift the scene once more. The dust of the workers and the forgotten silence of the soldiers recedes. Now, picture a large command tent pitched near the wall, or perhaps a residence built of timber and stone within a fortified garrison town. Inside, the atmosphere is different. Heavier fabrics drape across doorways. The flicker of oil lamps casts soft light on polished wooden tables, and the scent of cooked meat lingers in the air. This is the world of the border general. His position is one of both privilege and burden. Unlike the common soldier, he does not carry stones or pace the wall in solitude. Instead, he oversees the larger machine of defense, the scheduling of patrols, the distribution of supplies, the negotiation with allies, and the sending of reports back to the imperial court. His life is ordered by documents, seals, and messengers, rather than by calloused hands and raw shoulders. Yet, even for a general, the frontier was not a place of ease. The wall stood on the edge of empire, far from the luxuries of the capital. Winter winds rattled the shutters, and summers baked the earth dry. To maintain morale, he had to balance severity with leniency, ensuring that soldiers obeyed while also recognizing their fatigue. Archaeological records show written instructions from such officers, carefully detailed directives about guard rotations, ration allowances, and punishments for negligence. At meals, the general ate better than the men under his command. His table might hold pork or mutton, vegetables when available, and wine shipped in from fertile valleys. He dined with fellow officers, discussing the condition of the garrison, or reciting poetry to ease the monotony. The lower ranks, meanwhile, subsisted on millet and beans. The difference in diet alone marked the division of class, even along the same wall. His quarters reflected his station. Wooden furniture tables, stools, and low beds stood neatly arranged. Silk garments hung in chests, though they were simple compared to the finery of the capital. He wrote letters by brush and ink, perhaps to the imperial court, perhaps to family in distant provinces. Fragments of such writings have survived, requests for reinforcements, records of supply shortages, even notes of concern about the morale of troops. The general's life, though privileged, carried heavy responsibility. Should raiders breach the wall under his watch, he would be held accountable. A single failure could mean demotion, exile, or worse. The emperor's trust was a double-edged sword, brought power, but also immense risk. During times of tension, he would ride along the wall, surveying the land beyond. From his vantage point atop a watchtower, the horizon stretched endlessly, a shifting landscape of plains, deserts, and mountains. He studied it not for beauty, but for signs. A dust cloud signaling riders, a sudden glint of metal, the faint sound of hoofbeats. His mind carried the weight of strategy, where to reinforce, how to respond, when to hold back. Despite the constant readiness, long periods passed in silence. The enemy did not always appear, and the wall became more a place of waiting than of action. In those stretches, the general concerned himself with discipline. Training drills were held to keep soldiers sharp. Inspections ensured weapons were maintained. Festivals might be permitted to lift spirits, with music and dance echoing briefly against the stones. In quieter hours, the general might walk alone along the ramparts. He felt the rough stone beneath his palm, heard the wind whistle through the gaps, and contemplated his place between the empire and the wilderness. He was not a builder, not a laborer, not even a common guard. He was a link in the chain of command, a figure both respected and feared. Yet isolation touched him as well. The frontier was far from the heart of the empire, and distance bred loneliness. The lives of generals differed depending on dynasty. Under the Han, they commanded fortified towns along the wall, some bustling with traders and settlers. In later centuries, under the Ming, their responsibilities expanded to larger armies and more elaborate fortresses. But the essence remained the same: authority balanced by duty, privilege tempered by the vast emptiness beyond the wall. Imagine him, at night, sitting in his quarters, a candle burning low. He writes by its light, brush gliding slowly across paper. Outside, the soldiers stand their watch, their fires flickering in the distance. He knows he holds power over their lives, yet he is also held tightly by the expectations of the empire. His thoughts may wander homeward, to family far away, but duty calls him back to the present. Always the wall, always the horizon, always the burden of command. In this way, the border general lived a life very different from that of the builders or the guards, yet all three lives were bound together by the same line of stone. The wall connected them across class, across circumstance, across centuries. And so, the story of the Great Wall of China is not only about stones rising against the sky, nor solely about emperors and their decrees. It is also about this intricate web of lives, some harsh, some privileged, many forgotten, all woven into the fabric of a monument that endures still. Now the wall lies quiet. Its stones are worn, its towers crumbling, its once busy paths now wandered by travelers and tourists. The builders are long gone, their labor absorbed into the earth. The emperor rests in a sealed tomb, surrounded by silent guardians. The soldiers who once kept watch are dust, their names lost to time. The generals who commanded have faded into memory, their scrolls scattered and buried. Yet the wall remains. It is no longer a fortress of defense, but a reminder of ambition, toil, and endurance. Standing upon it today, you may feel the the vastness of history beneath your feet. The rhythm of those lives, the hammering of earth, the calls of overseers, the crackle of watchfires, the whispers of commandal seem to echo faintly in the stones. And as you rest now, drifting toward sleep, you can let that echo fade into silence. The wall, once alive with labor and watchfulness, is now still. The burdens of the past are no longer yours to carry. You lie not on cold earth, but in the comfort of the present, surrounded by safety. Let the past recede, like the wall itself winding into the horizon. Let your breath steady. Let the night settle in. And with that, our journey along the Great Wall comes gently to an end.